Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shvis, Perek Dalid, Halacha Dalid, and Halacha Hey. We're learning today Daf Lamed. We left off on Daf Lamed, Amid Aleph, Mamish, on the top of the Amid, and we just had a machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel regarding whether one may plant an Ilan Sirak, a barren tree, on Shvis. Midoiraisa, there is no issue, that's no question. The Tanakama holds that midirabanan you may not. Rashbag holds that even on a rabbinic level, one is allowed to work the land for the sake of produce that is not imbued with kedusha shvi'is. Quite amazing. And from there, we're going to right away continue to learn other areas in shvi'is where Rab Shimon ben Gamliel is going to be makel over the Chachamim or over the Tanakama, and therefore we're going to start today's shir by learning various braisas that speak about details of Hilchos Shvi'is. For example, this is really fascinating. We're not allowed to work the land, but what about using a charm, a segula that was used to improve trees? Can you do that on Shvi'is? It's not something gashmi, it's something ruchni. You're not working the land. On the other hand, evidently, Chazal considered certain segulas to really be effective, and therefore maybe you should not be allowed to use it. That will be a very interesting topic that we'll have today. And finally, when we're going to circle back to the Mishnah, to Halacha Dalid, when the Mishnah spoke about the Chiddush, the Mishnah really spoke about scenarios where one would have thought that since you're not allowed to prune a tree on Shvi'is, those activities should be usher. Right? Like cutting some wood off a tree for firewood. Well, I know your kavana is for firewood, but you're pruning. So nevertheless, the Mishnah gave scenarios where you will be allowed to do it, but when it came to the Besula Shikma, to a virgin sycamore tree, where every time you cut off a little branch, many grow out in its place, the Mishnah says you're not allowed to do it, no matter your intent. Rabbi Yehuda then said, true, you're not allowed to do it. But if you're going to cut it mamish by the ground level, or if you're cutting it over 10 tfachim, those parts of the tree, cutting something from there is actually detrimental to the tree, then you are allowed to do it. So said Rabbi Yehuda. We already said Rabbi Yehuda is not arguing with the Tanakama. He's simply further qualifying the law of the Tanakama. What the Gemara is going to do over here is to point out that these shiyurim of mamish by the ground and above 10 tfachim are imprecise. And we'll understand what he means, but we can apply the exception of Rabbi Yehuda a little bit broader than how it sounds. That will be more or less the sugya until halacha hey. On Daf Lamed Amud Beis, we're going to begin with the fifth Mishnah. The fifth Mishnah will continue to give more specific activities that is mutter, that is permitted, even lechatchila, even though it looks like pruning. And one of the rules that we will have in the Mishnah and subsequently in the Gemara, let's see how far we can get. Maybe we'll get all the way to Halacha Vav and Daf Lamed Aleph, is that doing an activity to prevent further deterioration will be permitted. Doing an activity that's going to improve, that's going to be usher. We already had this concept before. And without any further ado, Chavra, let's start right away on top. So again, this is a hemshech, okay, of the Rab Shimon ben Gamliel versus the Tanakama. Says the Braisa leTanakama ve'ein melamdim es hapara lachrosh ela b'cholos. If a person wants to train their cow to plow during Shvi'is, not to actually work the land, but to train their cow, Tanakama says you can only do it only b'cholos, only in an area of sand. In other words, only in an area where no one is planting. Not to have even a marasayim. Look on the top, Pnei Moshe, Ela b'cholos, only in a sandy area, which means makom she'enoi royal Israel, place that's not fit for plantation. Why? Shelo yeh nira kechodesh, for one not to give the appearance marasayim that you're plowing, even though the kavana is not to plow the land. The kavana is lelamda, to teach the cow or the animal, or lahargila, to get the animal habituated for it to plow on the 8th year. So me'ikeradin, you are allowed to do it, but there's smarasayin. That is again the Tanakama. However, back in the Baraisa, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, afilu b'toich stei chaveiroi muter, gewaldig. that in one's own field, you can't do that. Here again, if I'm plowing in someone else's field, I don't work someone else's field for the someone else. It doesn't work that way. The locals know that. So if they're going to see me plowing in my neighbor's field, they're going to understand that I'm doing it to train my cow. However, ubilvad shelo yismach es hama'ano. Make sure that the furrows are not as near to each other as one will usually do. So when the furrows are furrow apart, in other words, basically, you have to have two conditions. If two conditions are met, according to the Rashbag, you are allowed to do it lachatchila. Stay chaveiroi, and the furrows are more spaced than usual. Gaval. Weiter. Another brais. Or if you don't have the word tanei, then it's a continuation of the same brais. Abashol oimer mivorin becharashim. You may clear out an area in a forest. Why are you clearing it out? Not to prepare the land, that would be prohibited. You want wood. We already learned two Mishnayos ago that not so simple. You right when you're clearing out a densely packed olive tree area, so you can your mamish clear it out. There's restrictions. Two out of if you 2 or 3 yagoim yishadesh. Abba Shol says in a forest you can do it. V'goimem even me'im haaretz, and you can raise it down all the way to the ground, even though that gives a worse appearance of you clearing out land. What is the restriction? There is a restriction. That don't use the axe as your keli, as your implement, to clear out the area. Why is that? Because since an axe is also used to dig up the roots, digging up the roots is something that one would only do if they want to plant in that area. If the intent is only for wood, you wouldn't make the effort of going into the ground and uprooting the roots. It's not worth it. So don't use an implement that could be used to get the roots. And that's how you cover the marasayin. Weiter, another din. Ein boitkin es hazroim ba'adama ba'atzitz. If a person wants to make sure that the seeds that they have are good seeds, they want to check it out. Now, just to know midoiraisa, planting for the sake of growing is prohibited. Planting, even in the ground, planting seeds just to see the quality of the seeds is asur midrabanan, not midoiraisa. And when the Chachamim says you may not do it, they said not even if you're doing it in a flower pot. So this is an isur derabanan. So ein boitkin es hazroim ba'adama, even if it's only in a flower pot, not on the ground. Certainly in the ground, it may not be done midrabanan. You can't do that.
Why not flower pot? You can keep it indoors. There's no matayin.
Because midrabanan, you can't plant anything in a flower pot if you want the plant on tree.
No, but you're doing it as a test.
But that's
Kevan, marasayin is even b'chadri chadorim.
Marasayin means we don't know. We don't know what you're doing it for.
Got it.
Avol, however, what could you do if you want to check out the seeds? Like an eitz toiva, that people who know what they're doing, they can plant seeds in manure, and no one knows. Nothing grows properly. But however it is that you're checking out the seeds, that bedika is effective in manure. So do that. And another din, v'shoyden oisen b'shvis, you are allowed to soak seeds in water. People soak seeds in water simply to make them soft, and that will help the seeds when you plant them later to take root. That activity is allowed on the Shemitah year. There isn't even a rabbinic isser because you're not planting, you're soaking it in water. That's a pre-planting. You're not working the ground, you're working with the seeds. No problem. Next. Now, the next one is a little bit problematic as to what the chiddush is, but let's go. Umekaimen esho alvi. Alvi, we're going to go that it's aloe, right? Aloe is something that commonly would grow on rooftops. And just to know that aloe, this type of plant, could survive for a very long amount of time without you watering it. So umekaimen eso alvi berosh hagag, you are allowed to grow them, but you're not allowed to water them. Now, the pshat, you're allowed to grow them. It's a little bit shved. Like, what are we saying? You for sure cannot plant them. So what you would think, you would have to uproot them? Look inside the Rasharilio. Right? I think 6 lines at the end of the right column. Nirali, Shuhu Kamoy Aloha, Kamoy Hanu Aloha, the Perik Basar de Nadara. For who Shem Esev, it's a name of a grass, Shel Boisem, that has a good scent. It's called Ohalois, Beloshan Amikra. V'hasorim zoidim oisam l'fnei achalein abayis, and noble people plant them in front of their windows in their homes in order for there to be a good scent. And sometimes he writes, zoidim oisam, they are planted with Rosh Hagag, etc. Okay, so now the Ka'amar, top of the left column, the Mekayim and Oisam Hagag b'shvius, you are allowed not to plant them. You are allowed to leave them on your roof. V'oisam loitzei loyezer davar hamamidoy sheyiskayim. In other words, there's certain activities, that's pshat that you have to do to them for them not to get burnt by the sun. Can't plant them. I don't know what you needed to do to these plants. You needed to protect them somehow. You needed to do certain activities to make sure they don't get ruined when they are on the roof. You could do that only if they can survive without you watering them. But watering them, says the Rashidilio, that's already awesome. That's called avodas karka, avodas akarka, even though it's on the roof. You don't say it's on the roof, it's not on the ground. It's called avodas karka. In other words, you can. It's the same idea. If the plant is going to get ruined, you can take actions which will prevent it from getting ruined. But taking an action that will make it grow is something that you are not allowed to do, and that has already the implied chiddush. Guys, we already learned certain products without water will die. You are allowed to water. We already learned that. So aloe can survive a long time without it being watered. That you don't need to do. Might get weakened. It might not be gavaldic.
Aloe.
Yeah, aloe. Okay, weiter. Next. And now we're going into segulas. And this is really fascinating. And basically what the Braisa will be saying is that a segula that was done to a tree when the tree was ill, and that segula was there in order to remedy the tree, may not be done on Shvis. That's how effective these segulas are. Now, one segula that they used to do then is ein toilin toichin b'ta'enam. There are different ways of teaching these words. Let's go with, you're not allowed to hang a branch on a barren fig tree. The branch came from a productive fig tree, and when you would hang the branch, somehow it would, it's a school of this. It's like you are inspiring this tree to be like that tree. Now, the Braisa, and you're not allowed to do that on Shviz. And now the Braisa will tell you how to do this skula. Not on Shviz. How did it work? Now, either the word shoter, right, goes on a te'ena shoter, on a healthy fig tree. Others read the word shtar, that there was some note that was written and hung on the tree. Either they would hang a note on the tree, or they would hang the actual branch of a healthy fig tree. V'amar law, again, either these are words that are written on the document, or if you hung a branch, you would just say the words that hada avda. You tell the current barren one, this guy, this branch is producing fruit. Va'at leis at avda, and you're not. Gavaldik. You shame it into working. The way our teachers did it in the good old years. They took the student Nebuch that couldn't understand, and they put next to him a Talmud, and you say, he understands, so you don't understand? And that was a school for it to work. And you're not allowed to do it on Shviz. Oh, the branch says you could put the branch Vlad is saying the Gra says you did both. You put the branch and you wrote a document. Okay, very good. Now, what did we not learn in a different Braisa? That ilin shuhu menabel peiroisav. Menabel peiroisav means that when fruits begin to ripe too quick, they don't mature in the proper seder, it's not good. Not like how great is it? How sharp are these fruits? They mature and then they wither away and they fall off the tree. So what should you do? So says the Braisa, soikrin oisem besikra, that you are allowed to paint that tree with this red dye, and painting it with the red dye is a segula for it to stop, for its fruit to stop shedding. If you remember, we learned a long time ago that they would tie a roite bendela around the tree, which was a siman that the tree is sick, for people who walked by for them to daven. All the people with the red bends, it's a siman that they're sick, for other people to daven for them, that they should become well.
Amen.
If it would be a tree. Now here, it's not that way. Here, it's not that other people should daven, but the actual dyeing them with a red pigment is a skula for the fruits not to over-ripen too quick, and for them not to fall off the tree. That is a segula. Now, there is another option, which is not b'toich segula, but it's actually something physical, and that is that you burden the branches with rocks. What happens is the reason why fruits get ready too quick is because the tree has too much energy. What is it called? AHDDH,
ADHD.
Exactly. So what do you do to the tree? What do you do with a kid that's filled with energy? You run him do exercise. If you load up the tree with stones, it, so to say, it directs the extra koyach of the tree to manage the stones, and the fruits are not infected with that much energy, which makes them ripen full of. And another thing is umevasin lei diyavid, and you embarrass it. Now, how do you embarrass it? Says the Pnei Moshe.
It's right.
No, I'm sorry. Where's the embarrassment? I don't know exactly how they did that. I don't know what the embarrassment was. Now, I want you to know that there's two chidushim in this brayse, as the Pnei Moshe says. Number one is that you are allowed to do it on Shvius. Number two, some of these segulos, if they came from the Emorites, that's the way Chazal termed it, if they came from pagan practices, then Jews are not allowed to do them because it's Darkei Ha'amorim. Rabbi Leib Shapiro, Shlita, told me that when someone asked the Rebbe in the Yechidus regarding the red band, the Rebbe told him that it's Asar Mishum Darkei Ha'amorim. I think it's a printed letter. Because the origin, not of the Chamsa, the origin of the red bandle was mamish from pagan Avodah Zarah. We're not allowed to do it.
Isn't the red paint embarrassing? Like we say, a female should not wear red.
That's because of modesty.
I understand, but I'm saying, aren't you embarrassing a tree by painting it red?
I don't know what this means. I don't know what this means. The bottom line is that you are allowed to do. The Braisa says that you cannot hang the branch and write a document. You can't do that segula, because you're working the land. The it's bo'efen seguli, it's equally used. This Braisa is saying that you are allowed to do segulas. You could paint it red. So answers the Gemara Amri that Taman, the latter Braisa that allows you to use segulos. The law, we're going to go with the lo yater peiroisav. The lo yater peiroisav is that the tree already produced fruit. The fruit is already there. You don't want for the fruit now to get overly ripe and to fall off the tree. So you're doing something to prevent loss. Preventing loss is mutter, whether it's physical, putting up stones, whether it is with a skula, with a charm. However, the first braisa of ein toilen toichen b'te'ena is only prohibited when the yavid lechatchila. In other words, it didn't even have fruit yet. So you're doing something that will stimulate the growth of new fruit. That is something that you can't do on Shvis. In other words, one thing is for sure, that Chazal viewed segulos as something functional. It works. And therefore, there's a makim loimer that it will be usher to do on Shvis. But like all the other Isurei Shvis, as we're getting into the nuance now, that, stimulating growth is usher, preventing loss is mutter. How great is that? Okay. Turning to the Aflamet Amud Beis. The Braisa says that ein markiven the column. Markiven means to pollinate. Just to tell you how it works. When you have many trees are divided into male trees and female trees. The male trees have the pollen. The way it works. The female trees have the pistil. And when it comes to palm dates, Vlad, it's amazing. They both have flowers. You physically would take the flowers from the male trees. You would bring them over the female trees. You would shake it. The pollen would fall out, and it would make the pistils impregnate them. And if you wouldn't do that step by human beings, I know sometimes the bees do it, sometimes creatures do it, but when we do it, then the female palm date tree is the one that produces dates. And if it wasn't pollinated, nothing will come from those flowers. So your mamish, you're making it grow. So the Braisa says you're not allowed to do it. Ein markiven the kolim. Why? Because it is considered a avoidam. Now the problem is, this is such an obvious thing. Why did he even need to write it? Thank you for the picture. Says the Gemara. Why is that a chiddush? Loi timer for you not to say. Hoyel, again, different girsois. Hoyel, that vehefsid rabahu, that if you will not pollinate the tree when we need humans to pollinate it, then there'll be a tremendous loss. That means that the female trees in this season will not produce any dates. So maybe we would be allowed to do it. Don't forget, coming back to the few words of introduction that we gave to Masechta Shvi, that unlike Hilchos Shabbos that we are learning now in the Rambam, an Av and a Tulda are both Asur Midoiraisa. By Shvi'is, there's Avos, there's Toldos. The Toldos are all Midrabanan. The Midoiraisa is only the 4 that God says what not to do. God doesn't write, do not pollinate. So you would think if it's Mamash Alos, you'll have nothing. Kumash Malon, you're not allowed to do it. That indeed it is Asur. Okay. And now circling back to the end of Halacha Dalit, where the Mishnah spoke about the Chiddush, that from certain trees you are allowed to cut off branches for firewood from a tree, and it's not considered pruning. Obviously, when you do it in a way where it doesn't stimulate growth, when it comes to a psula shikma, any way that you will cut off a branch will stimulate growth. Tanakama says is asur. Rabbi Yehuda, who's not arguing, according to most, he's saying, Abed, even by psula shikma, if you cut wood off mamish ground level, that is mazik the tree, or above 10 tfachim, it won't stimulate growth. If you're doing it only for the firewood, you are allowed to do it. So says the Gemara that even though Rabbi Yehuda spoke about ground level and 10 tfachim above the ground, those shiurim are imprecise. What are the precise shiurim? Which means that if you are going to cut wood off the psula shikma under 3 tfachim from the ground, within 3 tfachim from the ground, that's the meaning of ground level. Ground level is lav dafka, only ground level. Now we're using lavud lekula. If it's within 3 tfachim, it's called ground level. A bigger chiddush is that even though Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah spoke about 10 tfachim, it's not true. If you are cutting it in its 10 tefach, there also it's detrimental to the tree. So if you want to give a exact measurement, what area of the psula shikma may not be touched on shvius from 3 off the ground all the way until 9 off the ground, above 9, which is in the 10th, is already permitted. And that's what Rabbi Yehuda meant. The Gemara is just clarifying what Rabbi Yehuda says. Okay. Moving on to Halacha Hey. Next mission. This is really a continuation of activities which one would think it's asur. One might even think it's asur midoiraisa. When the Torah says that you're not allowed to be zoimer your kedem. You're not allowed to prune. So you would think you can't prune. You can't trim the kedem. A few weeks ago, here in LA with Gabriel, we went to a kedem, and we actually witnessed pruning. And it's a very precise avodah. There are knots. He was explaining from what knot, in what part of the knot. If you don't prune it the right way, you won't stimulate growth. And that's really what the Mishnah is saying. So says the Mishnah that Hamizanef Zanaf is the tail. Hamizanef means that you're cutting it at the edge. You're cutting the edges of the vines. You're not cutting it where normally you would prune it, which is mamish by the knot. Look inside the Mara Fulda. The Mara Fulda is the first line under the Gemara. Hamizanef b'gefanim mekateya, you're cutting, you're clipping. Zenavois, the tails of the gefanim. Why are you doing it here? It's even worse. Not because you want firewood. It's nothing. It's a nothing of a vine there. The further away you go, the thinner it is. You're doing it because you want for the main branch, which would be the trunk, for it to get thicker. That's not called pruning. You're doing it kadeshi is ava hageza. You are allowed to do that. Now this is a gavaldik chiddush. In other words, let me tell you what the isur is. It becomes clear. If what you are doing only leads to the thickening of the trunk, that's not called pruning. Pruning is if you are doing an activity that will make the grape production more voluminous. There'll be more grapes and make voluminous. If you're doing something, you have to see a vine. They're all propped up because the trunks are nothing burgers. In other words, making the trunk thicker on this level is not because if there'll be a thicker trunk, there'll be more grapes. No. It's pashat. You don't want it to be that flimsy. So that is not the isur of the Torah. So first of all, that's one thing to know. Number two, you would think maybe asan midrabanan. Gam zeloi. It's not asan midrabanan. No, the Mishnah is saying that lechatchila, that you can be mizanav b'gefanim. Actually, we're not done yet. If a person is being mizanav b'gefanim, which let's go, theoretically is permitted, even rabbinically, or v'hakoitzitz b'kanim. Now we just had that yesterday. Kanim are a product that are not imbued with shvi'is kedusha. So we're going to go with you are allowed to cut them down. You know what happens? You cut them down, guys, for fuel. What happens is they grow back. That's fine. It's not food. So these two activities, again, that theoretically will be permitted, says the Mishnah, Machloikes, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and Rabbi Akiva, whether you have to make a shinui or not. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who's the Machmer, says, Yarchik Tefach. Yarchik Tefach means Maras Ayin, just Maras Ayin. If I am working near the ground, Vlad, a person who looks at me will see me with instruments, will see me by the ground, will think I'm digging the ground. So in order to make it clear that I am not digging the ground, both Kanim and these Gefanim, they're very flimsy. Lift them up a Tefach, just lift them up. And whatever it is that you're doing only one Tefach above the ground. One Tefach is really not that much. But what does that do? The observer will see that I'm not digging in the ground. He'll see me working on the kanim, on the gefanim, and not on the ground. In other words, Rabbi Yossi Aglili is concerned about marasayin. It's resolved. You get to cut exactly what you're cutting, but you have to just lift it up. Maybe by the kanim, don't go all the way to the ground. Leave a tefach. I know by the gefanim for sure. You're cutting the tips of the vines. The vines are very long. And if they were not trellis, they were ragliois, they were on the ground. So lift it up, one tefach to clip it from marasayin, and the edges. No, closer to the knots is a problem. That's what I was saying, that he was showing us that there's knots. I think he said on the third knot. He knew exactly where you have to do it, and he did it by the knot. That is where the grapes in the next season will come out a lot better. That's also doiraisa. Clipping the tips. It just makes the trunk bigger. It's mutter, even midrabanan. Marasayin, lift it off the ground. And Rabbi Akiva oimer, koitzes kedarka. You don't need to lift it. Not number one. And number two, Very good. I like what you're doing over here. He's showing on the pictures what we call the knots and exactly where they did it and also how they did it. You see, there's a diagonal cut, there's a straight cut, there's a lot of this in the Mishnah in a moment. However, and not only that, another chiddush, that the instrument that you are using can be any instrument that you want. Rabbi Akiva, that bekardoin, you can cut it with an axe, bemagol, with the sickle, bemageda, with the saw, or ubechol mashayirza, you don't even need to alter the type of implement because Rabbi Akiva is not concerned at all from Marasayin. Now we're going to see in the Gemara, we'll get there, a third Tana that is like in between. See, Rabbi Akiva holds not you have to lift it, nor you have to change your implement. Look, we're going to develop that in the Gemara. Now, Zakta Mishnah, Elon Shenifshach. If a tree cracked, and if you won't do anything to the tree, the crack will keep on cracking. It's going to further deteriorate. That's the big klal gadol. So you are allowed to do an activity that will prevent it from further deteriorating. You may not do an activity that's going to heal the tree. That you can't do. So Elon Shenifshach, what do? You can tie it. Loi sheyale. Not in a way, you have to know how to do it, that it will heal. That's going to be yasser. Ella shelo yosef, you can only tie it up in a way where you're going to prevent, like we mentioned, the crack from spreading further. And not to tie it in a way where you're going to fuse the crack parts together. Okay, so coming back to let's begin with the Gemara. Going back to the Mishnah began with the two cases of either hakoitzitz, hamazanav bikfanim, right? V'hakoitzes bekanim machloikas Rabbi Yossi Aglili and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yossi Aglili is concerned with marasayin, and what's the marasayin? That you might be working the ground. You're working the ground itself. You're hoeing, and to prevent that, you have to lift it up a tefach and then do your work. Rabbi Akiva says no such a thing is needed. Not only that, use any implement you want. So now let's go on a brayse. Tani, we learned in a brayse that hakoitzes bekanim. Here we have Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. If you would do that, this is to promote more growth of the reeds, which is allowed to be done, because there's no kedusha shvis in these kanim. So if people normally use an implement, the way you resolve the marasayin is do it in an unusual way. In other words, we don't have Rabbi Yossi Haglili, we don't have his comment concerning the second part of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said, Rabbi Yossi says you have to lift it up. What implement he didn't mention? Rabbi Akiva is the one that says not you don't have to lift it up. You can use any implement. Now we'll see Rabbi Yehuda says like this: change the implement. If people use a b'chlal keli, that's called lakoitz, then the way you do it is yitoik. Yitoik means do it manually. If the normal way in that place would be litoik yakoitz, so first of all you have to make a change. And number two, now actually, as we will see, that we will understand that Rabbi Yehuda is like Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Even though Rabbi Yossi Haglili did not explicitly mention that you have to make a shinui in the keli, but we're going to go with the understanding that since Rabbi Yossi Haglili is concerned with marasayin, so part of the resolution of marasayin is to make a shinui. Now, weiter says the Braisa koitzes bekoiros. If you're cutting beams for wood, lo yehi machalik umadrik. The way they would normally cut a tree. This is interesting, and I don't know why Kevin just put up a picture that actually spoke about that. Yeah. When you saw someone cutting a tree down with an axe, the normal way of doing is one blow is diagonal, and then one blow is flat. Diagonal, flat. Diagonal, flat. That is the normal way of cutting down a tree. When you do that on Shvis, even though me'ikir adin, when you're cutting wood off a tree for fuel, you can do it. But since people would also cut a tree to prune it, which is asur, so for maras ayin, you have to do it with the shinoi. So how do you do it with the shinoi? So lo yehi machlik umadrik, madrig umachlik. Either they began with the diagonal and then they did it with the level, or level diagonal. But the vart is that the normal way was they would swing the axe one time like this, one time like that. Straight, diagonal. Straight, diagonal. And by the way, that's a benefit to the tree. Kevin is showing a picture. of how they did it. I see what he's showing. What Kevin is showing is that you went diagonal in different ways. You went diagonal down and then you went diagonal up. That's why you have this interesting cake size taken out of the tree. Anyways, this is all done in a way where there is some sort of benefit for the tree. You're not allowed to do it that way. Ella mischaven shetehei koitzatztan shava. Always cut it at level. So you're cutting it down with the shinui. Tani, we learned in a brayso, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Oimer, Mokem shenahagu lahachlik. If you always cut it down level, if that's the minig, then yadrik, again, make a shinoi, then you cut it down on an angle. If everyone there, when they fell trees, they do it ladreg, then yachalik. In other words, Tanakama always allows you to cover that level. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, find out how they do it, no matter how they do it different. Versus a Tanakama that says that if you're cutting it straight, you can do it. Just don't do it. Don't alternate. Says the Gemara Vaytem. Now we're coming back to the reeds. The goyim mima aretz. When you are cutting down the reeds, you can cut it down all the way to the ground. Who is this not like? Chavra, this is not like Rabbi Yossi Haglili, right? Rabbi Yossi Haglili said that you have to lift it a tefach. Now, if you have to lift the vines a tefach by the reeds, you're not lifting it. You can't cut it all the way down to the ground. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is more lenient. Now, if he would be lenient like Rabbi Akiva, Vlad, then what would he say? You can use any implement you want. Rashbag is in between. On one hand, he's like Rabbi Yossi Haglili of our Mishnah. That he's not like Rabbi Yossi Haglili. He says, Goyim min haaretz, like Rabbi Akiva. On the other hand, he's not like Rabbi Akiva because he says, do not use an ox. Okay, very good. We have time. Let's go to Daf Lamed Aleph. Let's go until the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, when we have in our Mishnah, forget about this nuance of the in-between. Rabbi Yossi Haglili, we clarified, holds, like Rabbi Yehuda, we just said, completely l'chumra. That's the given over here. That not, you can go all the way to the ground. You have to go a tefach above the ground. Lift it, or by the reeds, you're losing the final tefach. And the implement has to be an unusual implement. Rabbi Akiva Mitzat Sheni is very lenient. So the Gemara is going to attempt to link this machloikes with the machloikes that we just had between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel on Daf Chav Tes Amud Beis. That will be the Havamina. Says the Gemara, L'chu'ura, Rabbi Yossi Haglili holds like Beis Shammai, and Rabbi Akiva will hold like Beis Hillel. So what are we talking about? Look inside the top. Marafulda, Rabbi Yossi Haglili ki Beis Shammai. In our pagination, we mamish just had it. On Daf Chav Tes Amud Beis, we learned the Mishnah of Meidel. Meidel is that you are uprooting olive trees to thin out the area, right? Before we got into the cutting down of the tree itself. They were planted on purpose. When they were planted packed together. But at some point, when they take, if you're going to leave them as they are, nothing will be good. Each one is taking up nourishment that they don't have land from because the neighbor is too close. Right? That's living in an apartment building, not in houses. You can't live that way. So what are you allowed to do? So Beis Shammai said you can only be Meidel, you can only be Yagoim, and not be Yesharesh. It means you cannot uproot it. You can take it to the ground. You can't uproot it. And Beis Hillel says if you're being machlik, that's not negena. If you're taking out 3 trees or more, then there's a marasayin issue. But if it's only Meidel, then you can completely take it out. So l'choira, it sounds the same. That Rabbi Yossi Haglili, that has these restrictions, I got a tefach and the implement, he will hold like Beis Shammai, only Yagoim. Rabbi Akiva, who's mamish lenient, you can go all the way to the ground, you can use any implement. L'choira, he follows Beis Hillel, and this is never an ideal. Why is it never an ideal? Otazoi. So frag the Gemara, what are you telling me? V'chein osinon masni Rabbi Yossi Haglili ke Beis Shammai. Is that all you're trying to tell me? It can't be. In other words, really, it's a 2-leveled question. Question number 1 is, since Beis Shammai, b'makim Beis Hillel eino Mishnah, it's a big doichik to say that the Tana Rabbi Yossi Haglili will hold like Beis Shammai. And furthermore, and there's a furthermore. So the Marafulda says, "V'oi," the end of the Marafulda before the new Mishnah, Yarchik tefach ka'amar. Yarchik tefach ka'amar. I don't know exactly what the Marafulda means with this. Because I understand that Yarchik tefach is like Yogoim. It fits. By a tree, Yogi means leave the roots, and by reeds, you never rip out the roots, you go away a tefach. Okay, the problem is for sure, could it be that Rabbi Yosef Aglili follows Beis Shammai? That's the whole Chiddush? It can't be that. And therefore, the Gemara says, everyone holds like Beis Hillel. Everyone holds like Beis Hillel. By the case of the olives, if it's not smoothing out an area, you go all the way to the ground. But over here, you can't go all the way to the ground. You have to go a tefach. Why? In other words, he holds that when it comes to cutting down an olive tree, every case is a case. Cutting down an olive tree, you can cut it all the way down to the ground. You can cut it all the way to the ground. No one will have a marasayin issue. People understand what you're doing. However, over here, when it comes to the grapevine, when it comes to the reeds, if you won't be yarchik tefach, there'll be a marasayin. And don't compare one case to the other. Don't compare. You know, we're ignorant. For us, it's all a farmer. A farmer, he's planting. It doesn't work that way. Beautiful. And that's the chiddush of the Mishnah, that even Beis Hillel, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, by the olive tree, you can go all the way down to the ground. Yeah, by the vines, you have to lift it up a tefach. And by the reeds that you can't lift it a tefach, you may not cut the bottom tefach. Okay, Gavaldi Cheva, we'll stop over here. And God willing to be continued. I think, guys, we're gonna take up Monday Isru Chag. The next class will be Monday morning after Sudas Mashiach at 6:15.
Wait, so no class on Chol Hamoed?
That's correct.
Go ahead.
All right.